Kiro! Don't forget tomorrow's rehearsal!
How can I forget?
The blond young man smiled and waved to his friends as he walked into the subway station with a violin case flung over his back. There were only a few passengers on the last subway. A drunk man sat across from Kiro. The noise from the whizzing wheels drowned out his drunken snores, as well as the sounds of tapping from Kiro's keyboard. His soft blonde hair swayed slightly as his slender fingers danced across his laptop, entering line after line of code scrolling rapidly on the screen. Ever since he lost contact with his master a year ago, Kiro had been tracking the clues Key had left in the vast world of the internet. Kiro was not certain if Key had foreseen this. Whenever he deciphered a complex site or opened an ordinary root directory, he would always find a message his master left for him. Sometimes, his master proudly bragged about the global sensation caused by a financial fraud he had exposed. Other times, he randomly mentioned that an ice cream shop in Florence was delicious. And as for the Hollywood blockbuster sequel Kiro had been looking forward to, Key had already seen it and told him the plot was an absolute mess and that he would not recommend it. It was only with Kiro that Key would break from his usual taciturn self and reveal his true nature. It was also precisely this which made Kiro feel as if his master had never disappeared, that the silver-haired man still lived on in the codes and that he must be waiting to meet him somewhere. As more and more messages were collected, Kiro seemed to have discovered a hidden clue about Key's whereabouts. Finally, with this clue, Kiro found a string of letters left by his master in the FBI archives only a month ago. He managed to decipher that the string pointed to a location, but failed to detect specific coordinates, even using many traditional mathematical and linguistic methods. Key left him many riddles, but this code was undoubtedly the most difficult of all. Could it be that he was never on the right track? Kiro rested his head against the railing and stared at the screen in silence. Perhaps he shouldn't use traditional cryptography. It was a string of codes designed by the best hacker in the world, after all.
Maybe I should interpret it with hacker's language,
Kiro muttered. At that thought, he reopened a new interface without hesitation. The train had long passed the station at which Kiro had meant to disembark. He continued to chew the now flavorless gum, giving his full attention to the lines of code on the screen. At the very moment the wheels came to a halt, Kiro's index fingers tapped on the enter key. The code stopped refreshing. The cursor jumped a couple times on the screen, and then a brand new interface popped up. As the doors slowly opened on either side of the subway car, the announcement woke the drunk man, who staggered to his feet and left after a yawn. The pleasant female voice announced repeatedly,
"This is the last stop. All passengers, please leave the train. This is the last stop. All passengers, please leave the train."
Loveland City. Kiro stared at the name on the digital sign interface with a dazzling smile.
This is the last stop.
Inside the icy silver hall, men and women in high positions looked arrogantly down at the blond young man before them. Each person's chest donned an S-shaped brooch, silver-white metal reflecting the sharp glow of the cold room. One of the seated women suddenly spoke.
"When did you last see Helios?"
At age 15, he drove me to the airport when I left for school in the States.
Don't play dumb.
A man in the shadows rudely interrupted him.
3684, you know what we're asking.
Kiro pursed his lips and continued his reply.
In the FBI archives, I found the message he left for me. The message was...
The alien language made up of Latin and Roman characters was read aloud, word for word, leaving out the underlying deciphered interface. After all, that interface had been destroyed after he read it. He was certain that even Black Swan couldn't uncover any clues. As for what the code word was, the young man slightly pursed his lips and chuckled silently. He wouldn't be standing there if they could decipher it themselves. Sure enough, after a long period of silence, a man finally stammered,
So, Helios is indeed missing.
We haven't heard anything from him for 2 years.
a woman said coldly.
It's time to replace the deity.
Replacing a deity isn't up to us to decide.
The man waved his hand.
Not to mention the fact that Helios is...
At that point, he suddenly realized that a pawn was awaiting orders. He paused mid-sentence and stared at the young man at the bottom of the stairs. 3684 was no longer a weak orphan. As a successful experiment in the Black Swan Project, he was a rising star in the outside world. Yet this blond young man maintained a meek posture before them, as if he was deaf to their discussion.
Your next mission has been arranged.
The man gave his orders, and Kiro listened quietly.
Finish all your filming abroad and shift your focus to Loveland City.
Kiro's footsteps quickened after stepping through the gate. His leather boots made a sharp sound against the ground as he practically ran away from headquarters. Using almost all his strength to keep his tottering body from falling, he panted heavily, trying to calm his racing heartbeat. Loveland City. Kiro repeated the words in his heart. What are the chances? The coordinates he had deciphered from the string a week ago also pointed to Loveland City. His original plan had been to surreptitiously go there while evading surveillance, but now the task at hand would be much easier for him. The exact coordinates were yet to be deciphered, but it wouldn't be a problem as long as he could freely travel to Loveland City. Loveland City. Images of an old orphanage and a pair of big, lustrous eyes flashed across Kiro's mind.
I can finally see you,
Kiro said softly. After arriving in Loveland City, Kiro knew he couldn't waste any more time, or else he would only be more closely monitored by Black Swan. He fully utilized all the time he could to decipher the remaining coordinates. The final numbers and images pointed him to an abandoned building in Loveland City. This was where he finally saw a key. The white room gradually crumbled beneath his feet. Kiro stood silently, staring down at his hands. In them, he held a computer with a flashing red light, which was the key handed to him by his master just then. This was the key to the most important door in the world, destined to be coveted by countless people, and therefore he could trust no one. Only with judgment as accurate as machines could he guide everything to the right path. Kiro gripped the computer tightly, the last words of his master echoing through his mind. We shall stand in darkness as we defend the light.
I will remember, Master.
Kiro replied in a whisper. The white space completely disintegrated. He took a deep breath, dried the tears at the corners of his eyes, and left the dusty building with new determination. 3684 was under close surveillance. Kiro wasn't surprised that Black Swan knew about his visit to the abandoned building in search of Key. He was prepared for a fight. But quite unexpectedly, they didn't immediately investigate or interrogate him. He initially thought they were unconcerned, but the events at the hacker conference made him realize that his opponents hadn't underestimated him, but that they had other prizes to obtain. They not only wanted the key, they also wanted the queen. The girl had slipped out of consciousness, her petite body lying quietly in his arms. He thought of how she had been so scared that her fingertips ran cold, and yet she still managed to keep a smile for him. Kiro felt at once as if his heart had been seized. He looked coldly up at the flashing images around him. All those experimental displays were sheer malice, as if taunting Kiro that everything he did was useless. Kiro slightly lowered his gaze as a glimmer of gold flashed across his eyes. He lowered his head and pressed his lips gently to the girl's hair, whispering a promise in her ear, even though she couldn't hear him.
Don't worry. I've hidden the key. The gates will only open for you.
Kiro had already braced himself when he received the code. But the side effects of the key were much more severe than expected. In order to save the girl trapped in the endless winter, he had opened the door once, only once, and it nearly broke him. A tremendous amount of information poured into his body like a torrent, and every inch of his bones screamed in agony as if his body would be crushed the next second. Scenes flashed before Kiro's eyes as if he had become one with the information. Each code warned him of parameter errors that required an immediate end to the operation. Kiro fell on one knee as his legs buckled. Just as he was about to lose consciousness, a pair of hands seemed to reach out and hold him tight. These soft, delicate hands he had held numerous times in the face of crisis and at times of pure happiness. The moment Kiro uttered her name, he gained the strength to resist the torrent. He pulled himself up from the ground. The scene before him dissipated and he was back in his room. Kiro looked at the computer, breathing heavily. The progress bar on the screen was now full. The door had been opened, and she was back. Soon after Kiro's comeback, the company organized a small variety show called Kiro's Fairy Tale World. In keeping with Kiro's style, the children played games as characters from classic fairy tales in the first half of the show, while the second half involved the children listening to Kiro tell stories around a campfire.
Once upon a time.
Kiro was in a cloak with a short lute, his blue eyes reflecting the campfire before him, like a bard from tales of lore.
In the little village by the forest lived a boy and a girl who were very close friends.
Very close. How close is very close?
A girl with braided hair asked, resting her cheeks on her hands. Kiro tilted his head and thought for a moment.
Well, so close that you'd want to give her pretty flowers when you see some, that you'd want to sing to her when you hear a nice song, that you'd want to share your favorite potato chips with her.
Whoa!
The children exclaimed.
They must be very close friends.
They are indeed.
Kiro smiled as he plucked the strings of the lute. The story continued along with the melody.
However, the girl had a secret. She was actually an elf, and elves can't stay on Earth for too long. Sooner or later, she would have to leave the boy.
Oh.
The children scrunched up their tiny faces.
What should they do then? Is there a way the girl can stay?
If it were me, I wouldn't want to be separated from my best friend.
A boy with a round face yelled.
The boy didn't want to be separated from his best friend either, so he was sad when he learned her secret.
A faint smile spread across Kiro's face.
So he traveled into the deepest depths of the forest to seek help from the most powerful wizard in the world. He walked in the forest for a very long time, until the crescent moon hung in the sky. The crows shrieked from the trees, and the eyes of beasts appeared in the dark. At last, he finally found the cabin where the wizard lived. Sadly, although the wizard was the most powerful in the world, he couldn't make the girl stay. But to reward the boy's courage, he gave him a magic key that could open the door to the elves' world.
I see. So even if the little girl returns to the world of the elves, they can still visit each other.
The boy raised his hand.
Did I get it right?
Well,
Kiro grinned and stroked the boy's frizzy hair.
it would be great if that was the case.
The day after this variety show aired, Kiro's special single titled The Fairy Tale Key was released. The music video told the story of a young man who sent his love to paradise while he himself waited in the dark. Although it was a sad story, the music video cleverly utilized the theme of the door and key. Each door opened to a classic fairy tale world, creating bright and dreamy images. But the highlight was none other than Kiro in his many costumes. Whether it was a wanton pirate or an elegant prince, he took everyone's breath away as he stole each scene. Both the song's arrangement and the music video were produced by Kiro. Its catchy melody quickly pushed it to the top of the charts. And that lyric in the chorus had become one of the season's trendy quotes. "'Cause I'm the steadfast tin soldier under the tower. 'Cause love is the key that unlocks everything." Dark clouds swirled above the canopy, an exhausted crowd floundering below. The coronation ceremony of the queen was drawing to a close, and this chaos, which had been like a comedy of errors, along with it. Only the members of Black Swan were filled with a sense of anticipation and enthusiasm. Looking up at the ominous dark clouds and the blonde young man, they were struck with a kind of awe, but also fear. After the numerous twists and turns, no one would have foreseen that the pawn would one day become the final chess player, who would lead them back on track toward Black Swan's ultimate goal.
If she succeeds, then we'll be halfway there, right?
Hephaestus walked up to Helios with his hawk-like eyes fixed on the still corners of his mouth.
The rest is up to you now, Helios.
Helios finally shot him a glance from the side.
Did they send you to test me?
Hephaestus shrugged.
I wanted to ask about that myself. Don't forget, you have a history. I heard you wanted to keep the key for yourself at the hacker conference.
Helios didn't bother to clear up the misunderstanding. Instead, he simply withdrew his gaze indifferently.
I have my own concerns.
There appeared to be light bursting forth from the black clouds ahead. At that moment, the Queen's power exploded, and everyone looked on at this scene in shock. Only Helios lowered his gaze, then turned to leave.
Where are you going?
Hephaestus was surprised. Shouldn't Helios host a celebration party for his men after everything had gone so smoothly?
To do what I have to do.
Helios didn't look back.
And you should do what you have to do.
On the way out, memories raced through Kiro's mind. His painful childhood, the joy of his rebirth in his teenage years, the helplessness from his master's disappearance and his final wishes, and everything he saw behind the door. Finally, he thought of her. When Kiro thought of her, corners of his tightly pursed lips finally softened into a smile. He took his phone out of his pocket, wanting to send her a welcome message as he did last time, but then deleted it right before he was about to press send. It's better to let her rest first, Kiro thought to himself. After she's good and rested, he wanted to share a lot of delicious food and have fun with her. They could watch a movie in the cinema, then try out the new cake shop on the way home. Sabin wouldn't notice if it was only a small piece. If they had time in the evening, they could beat the last level of the online game they failed last time. His mind wandered off with these thoughts as he opened the music player on his phone. The door of the temporary base was pushed open, and the light melody of the fairy tale key reverberated in the dim and solemn hall. It was a little creepy, yet strangely romantic. The blond young man hummed softly and stepped into the darkness along to the beat. The little boy stood in front of the gate. The key the wizard gave him weighed heavily in his pocket. He would not hesitate again. Love could cause errors to occur in otherwise stable parameters, but it was also love that gave him the courage to open the door. A screen popped up in front of him with an electronic voice asking him to enter the key. The man's lips raised slightly as he deftly entered a string of words. "For my queen."